Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for sticking around to the end of the day for this final talk. To give you a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to give a really regional overview of some of the water issues that the Department of Water is trying to manage for in the Peel region, where the Nambeelup development is located, and how the department is trying to plan for the multiple needs that need to be addressed with water. And then Wendy will be presenting a second section specifically focusing down on the Nambeelup Industrial Estate and following the results from its Drainage and Water Management Strategy document. And that's going to be the real key to the talk, so I'm going to try and fly through my section so Wendy's got plenty of time to explain the more interesting and technical components. So the study area is set in the Peel region. It's broad, flat coastal plain everyone's fairly familiar with, and it has its fair share of water quality problems. Pictures in 2007 on the top left of algae being piled up from on the edge of a Peel inlet. Bottom left is the algal blooms that occurred in 2009 near agricultural drain outlet. So this is an area that has a lot of constraints, and so the reason that is because it's a highly connected catchment with a massive drainage network of farm drains, of water corporation drains, regional brooks, two major rivers, and we're all collecting whatever's placed on the catchment out to the east and focusing it down towards the Peel Inlet, which is really the greatest environmental asset of the region. So what comes with that? In winter, being despite all that drainage network, in winter we have an area that has massive surface inundation due to water tables that rise all the way to the surface. So we have a massively waterlogged environment, and then on top of that we have an area that has a very large flood risk, especially as you get down closer towards the Peel Inlet. So it's an area that is therefore highly water constrained. And within that area, that yellow polygon is the area that's under investigation for future urban development. So it gives some idea of the scale of the water issues that we're dealing with. And in the purple polygon, that's the proposed district for the new Nambeelup industrial area. That will be really a prime employer for all the new development that occurs in the region and urbanisation. So it's a fairly important asset that we're talking about here for the future direction of the Peel region. On top of all that water that we've got to deal with, as I just mentioned previously, we've got a really major nutrient problem in this area. On the graph on the left, for nitrogen, our current load for the nitrogen arriving into the Peel Inlet by the Harvey River as well is around 1,000 tonnes. And if we were to urbanise all that yellow polygon with traditional urban development, we're going to be getting closer towards 1,100 tonnes of nitrogen entering that system per year. For phosphorus, we actually have a target that's legislated back in 1992 that would limit phosphorus export into that system to below 75 tonnes. Currently we're sitting just above 140 tonnes a year on average entering that system, and if we were to develop that area with traditional urban development, that's only going to increase well past up towards 170 tonnes, so well and truly beyond legislated limits. So we know we've got a eutrophication problem, and I should mention the reason why nutrients are going to become a bigger problem as we urbanise is generally traditional urban is going to have a higher nutrient input rate than beef grazing that's already there, but the other major factor is we more efficiently convey nutrients down towards the Peel Inlet rather than letting the water sit in the paddocks and slowly move through the system and allowing time for attenuation. We rapidly convey those nutrients where they then have to be processed within the estuary. So there's that problem to deal with. And on top of that, there's a water supply problem, particularly for non-potable supply. Within this region, the Kretschmer Aquifer, which is a major resource for industry east of Pinjarra, that's 100% allocated. The Leederville Aquifer, which is a major water supply aquifer for all other areas, that's fully allocated in the main development areas already before we even start putting down the house pads. And the superficial aquifer, while there's allocation there, it's very thin, it has potential acid sulphate soils and in some areas actual acid sulphate soils, as well as protected wetlands. So it's not an ideal source for high yielding bores, which are going to be supplying your industry, your public open space, your schools, commercial precincts, all those areas where you need lots of water. So in this area, we're basically facing an issue. We've got lots of water to deal with, we've got a pollution problem to deal with, and we're now facing the end of easy water to meet non-potable demand. And I won't hang around on this slide for long to move through quickly, but this is just a list of all the competing needs that the Department of Water needs to address as we develop this region. Obviously stands out that the recreational values for the Peel Inlet and the Harvey Inlet are obviously going to be hugely important for the local population and those people that want to move into the area. But then there's other issues like the sand supply issue is a major one that I know Jim's been bringing up for quite a few years now as well as health problems like mosquitoes. So we've got to make sure we manage water to avoid the issues that we see even as far north now as Coburn with Ross River virus, etc. So to manage all these competing needs, we worked through that Better Urban Water Management Framework, which Shelley helped develop. And within that, we've got the State Water Plan, an overarching plan. Then below that, the Perth Peel Water Plan. And then in 2011, we published the Drainage and Water Management Plan within that study area. And that Drainage and Water Management Plan is really a keystone document for all developments in this area. We fed in a huge amount of technical work, probably unprecedented in Western Australia for this level of planning and for property development. There were hydrology or groundwater and surface water technical studies, flood studies, nutrient studies, acid sulfate soil and hydrochemistry reviews, environmental water requirement studies, flora and fauna studies, and then MAR feasibility thrown on the bottom because we could see early on that it has a lot of potential to address a lot of these problems. And all that information through the framework then gets fed down into the district water management strategy and then the sub-planning under that. And it's Wendy that's going to be talking about that DWMS, as we call it, straight after me. The key outcomes from the DWMP, though, were Key Principle 1, manage catchments to maintain or improve water resources. Key Principle 2, manage flooding and inundation risks to human life and property. And Key Principle 3, ensure the efficient use and reuse of water resources. MAR obviously addresses Key Principle 3, but importantly, it can be a very useful tool for addressing the first two principles as well. So MAR, basic concept, the idea is take subsurface drainage, put it through retention basins, treatment systems, inject it into a large aquifer underground, store it seasonally, and then in summer pull the water back up, feed it into irrigation or use it to turn the cogs of industry or green the region and water your schools, etc. So that's a basic principle. With the feasibility study that we did, looked at the availability of drainage water in that region, the suitability of the aquifers and the water quality, and looked at demand, and then it did a viability and difficulty assessment, and also looked at the knowledge gaps. And so that's published and available on our website for you if you're interested in reading it in more detail. The key outcomes, though, are that within that development area of all those coloured polygons, we're looking at between 12 to 22 gigalitres a year of additional drainage water, depending on climate and drainage scenario. But that's a hell of a lot of water. Just in that Nambeelup development zone, and that's the green polygon, which is actually a bit bigger than the industrial zone, but we're looking at between 2.7 and 4.6 gigalitres a year of drainage water that needs to be managed coming from that site. It's a massive increase from the pre-development condition. And the reason that is because prior to development, that water table is coming to the surface. It's able to evaporate through direct evaporation, evapotranspiration through deep-rooted vegetation and shallow-rooted, and obviously cows drinking it, I think. Then we go to post-development. We bring in that fill, we bring in the soak wells, more impervious areas, and we start infiltrating water, so we increase our recharge rates, and we've decreased our evaporation rate. So the difference is about 25% of rainfall, or about, in this area, of about 800 millimetres of rain. We're looking at about 200 millimetres a year on that landscape of water that we need to deal with. So that's why we're trying to develop solutions. We looked at the geology of the area, and that huge purple unit is the Catamaran Aquifer, and it's a massively thick aquifer, of which most of it is brackish and not currently used for potable water. So that really stands out here. That's a target that we view as most favourable for MAR because it's confined, it has few existing users, and in the development area it has a salinity mainly in excess of 1,500 milligrams a litre. So the idea is that by injecting fresh water, we're actually creating a new use of this aquifer which generally can't be used. And that just points out where the existing users are over towards the east, pretty much all around Alcoa's Pinjarra refinery and one large irrigator. Using really conservative assumptions, and I won't again because I'm trying to give Wendy as much time as possible, but using quite conservative assumptions, looking at that aquifer, assuming that it was only 50 metres thick, for example, instead of being 300 metres thick. Between 20 and 100 gigalitres could be injected into that aquifer, stored in that aquifer for recovery later on. And that was using really conservative assumptions. So it's a huge reservoir available to us. And then we looked at the demand side, and the Perth Peel Strategic Directions document identified that in this area we're looking at about 13 gigalitres a year of additional demand for public water supply, so for drinking water, and about 14 gigalitres a year of additional demand for non-potable water. So we have this huge demand side to our equation to say, look, we need to identify new water resources. So with those aquifers at full allocation, you can see the way the hydraulic heads are changing in the Yarragadee, which is effectively the same aquifer as the Catamara in this region, and you can see how rapidly heads have been declining at current allocations. So you can understand the level of the water problems and water constraints from that demand side down there as well. Industry demand already exceeds the aquifer capacity for supply. So this time last year, Alcoa had to revert to trucking water just to maintain production at its plants. And we look at the Nangara Mound, and the Nangara Mound's at record lows, and further reductions in allocation are going to be coming from the Nangara Mound. So we have a system where we're trying to build desal plants, but we're continuously losing water from inflow into our dams and groundwater recharge up there on the mound. So we need to identify and make best use of new water resources. And so now I'm actually going to hand over to Wendy because I really want to get this focus down on the Nambeelup Industrial Estate and how it can be a part of the solution to address these problems that I've listed.
Thanks for that, Peter. Well, I'll start off with focusing on a bit of the background to where Nambeelup exactly is and the existing environment there. So Nambeelup is 7 kilometres northeast of Mandurah. It's this area here in the hashed areas, the black and the brown hash areas. It's a project kicked off by Department of Planning. They're proposing to look at potentially developing the full area, which is 1,082 hectares, so it's a rather large site. It'll supply an industrial lots for a long time into the future. But the initial focus area, which is the black hashed areas, is 556 hectares, and of that, the purple area here is already zoned industrial. So no industrial lots exist as yet, and the industrial areas are moving through the planning process at the moment. So let's look at the Nambeelup environment. If you take a drive around the area around September, October, you will see a lot of water lying around. So these are some of the sites where I found water lying around by the culverts, near the outlet culverts as well as some of the northern drains, as well as in the middle of paddocks. There's water lying in the drains there as well. I noticed particularly that there was very poor grades on the drains. So this particular area here, the water was just lying there, and it was tanned, and it was groundwater sitting exposed to the surface. So what else is there? There's a lot of wetlands. You can see that this red outline here is the proposed development zone, and within that there's 7 wetlands, and nearby there's a lot more wetlands that we have to make sure that we don't impact when we build these areas. So to help describe what the pre-development environment was and characterise the groundwater, we partnered with Department of Water, the Water Science Branch, who took the Murray District Water Management Plan regional model, which was an advanced groundwater surface water interaction model, and they refined it to the Nambeelup study area. So this image just shows the refined model boundary, and it shows Nambeelup Brook, which runs along the southern border, and the Serpentine River, which runs along the western boundary. And you can see here some of the drains. There's multiple drains. There's not one single drainage channel. And the coloured surface is the topography. So there's many low-lying areas here towards the Serpentine River and also towards this area here. And that there is the new highway, which provides some constraints for that southwestern corner of the site. So the modelled average annual maximum groundwater level is shown here with the blue lines, with the depth to that groundwater shown with the colours. So the blue areas is where they modelled groundwater above the natural surface, and the green areas show where the water was just below the surface. So you can see from this image that there are many, many areas where groundwater at or near the surface is a particular issue for this site. So how do you manage this if you're going to develop? So the traditional way is you put drains in and you bring in fill, and I also show the soak wells there, and Peter talked about this previously, but you infiltrate the water, and if you do infiltrate the water and don't have the rainwater tanks, we estimate that there would be about 60% recharge, and you would have to control the groundwater level rise that would happen from that increased recharge. So you lay subsoil drains at a particular controlled groundwater level that is approved by Department of Water. So depending on where you lay those subsoils depends on, and also the recharge depends on the amount of subsoil volume you get. So we'll look a little later at what kind of volumes are we going to get from Nambeelup. This here shows the development and the catchments. So the POS areas, the POS areas are shown in green, so that's just the regional POS areas, as well as all the drainage lines. So these are the arterial drains only. And so there was multiple constraints for this site when we looked at the arterial drainage planning. So the areas in blue circled show all the areas that are constrained. They're constrained for multiple reasons. They're constrained by the new freeway culverts in this southwestern corner. They're constrained because there's no formalised channels in these western catchments. So there's overland flow towards wetlands, towards the Serpentine. They're constrained along this Golan-Patterson Road drain because there's little or no grade. And similarly in this northern catchment, there's little or no grade, as well as water sitting above the natural surface in some of these areas here. So when we look at setting arterial drain inverts and control groundwater level inverts, we've got to consider our outlet constraints, and it's significant in this area. So we had a go at setting the controlled groundwater levels and came up with a surface and provided them to Department of Water, and they ran that through their model and came up with some drainage volumes. So these are some of the drainage volumes that were produced. So for one of the catchments, there was 0.89 gigalitres found to be produced from one catchment alone. And when you look at the major catchments, say 3 or 4 of the larger catchments that had low-lying areas, there was a total of 2.6 gigalitres generated that we could potentially capture and use for MAR. I'll go over the benefits for MAR. One of the benefits was obviously reusing this water, so that water then doesn't flow out and doesn't get lost down the drains and into the Peel inlet. So another benefit, I'll go over 4 benefits. So one of the other benefits of MAR in Nambeelup is because some of those drainage lines are so constrained and have existing inundation. You can see here, this is one outlet by a freeway culvert, and there's groundwater sitting there exposed to the surface currently. So in order to develop that particular catchment, you would have to not only fill those low-lying areas, but there would be a flow-on effect if you grade all the way up to the top of the catchment. So fill becomes a very big issue in these catchments. So one of the solutions for those 2 or 3 catchments where grade was an issue, I'll just go back to the main plan. So this particular catchment and this particular catchment and that particular catchment, they all have some low-lying inundated areas currently, and we're proposing to retain those 3 areas in a corridor, in a public open space corridor. So they would become seasonally inundated. We know that the Shire has to consider the risks of taking such a asset on, and they prefer dry swales. So one of the things that MAR can do is that it can help alleviate the issues for these particular catchments by lowering the groundwater and aiding in the drainage outcomes and the fill levels for those catchments. So that's the first 2 points covered. So let's move on to the third point. Another reason for MAR in this Nambeelup area is that it aids in meeting the water quality targets. So the existing groundwater of the area has elevated nutrients in it. The median concentrations from the groundwater monitoring that's been performed in the past over the different land holdings range from about 0.01 to 1.4 milligrams per litre, and there's some sites that peak higher than that. So for post-development, once we capture that water through subsoil drainage, it'll then be passed through our treatment train, and then if it meets the targets, that's good, but there may have to be some contingency plans if they don't meet targets. So the aim is that we meet the allowable phosphorus export load per unit developed area of 0.29 kilograms per hectare per year. So the fourth reason for MAR in Nambeelup is alternative water supplies. We looked at the demand in the area. So Water Corporation gave us some numbers of what they thought the demand was for the industry based on the existing industrial area demands. And then we estimated it that between 20 to 60% could be a non-potable demand for the area. And I'll come back to that when I compare total volumes of what we could then produce with a MAR system. So with a MAR trial, Department of Water is currently looking at trying to establish the first MAR trial in Nambeelup, and Peter's estimated that would be approximately $7 million to get the first trial going. So that's just for one bore on one catchment, and the cost in total covers a range of things, including like the well development headworks, the hydrologic and geological testing, the work site preparation, also the pre-treatment system, and a limited area of purple pipe distribution. So you can just see here one of the existing injection wells from over in City of Salisbury. So it's a small footprint for that particular injection site. So we know so far from the data from the District Water Management Strategy that there's a lot of water available from subsoils. The challenge, however, is to retain that water, treat it and inject it prior to the subsoil water leaving the site. If we look at potential yields for a MAR distribution system, the yield is dependent on the size of that retention storage as well as the treatment rate of the treatment system. And here is a graph that shows the potential injected volumes, which ranges between about 150 and 300 megalitres per year if you have a 20-metre retention basin. And that is based on just one of the catchments, so Freeway 1 catchment subsoil volume discharges. So that first single bore that could potentially produce 300 megalitres per year, if we compare that to demand rates, it's within that range of the initial development area that I showed you previously. So what are some of the potential cost offsets that such an initial trial could provide? Well, for that one catchment, it could avert potential costs of eutrophication of the downstream of the site, and it provides certainty for the phosphorus treatment for that catchment. So then the proponent will know that they can definitely achieve the legislated phosphorus targets. A MAR system would also provide economic savings. So I did a quick estimate based on the cost of fill that the engineer gave me. So he estimated that it would be about $20.9 per cubic metre of fill. And if I was to raise the development by 0.3 metres to provide a extra, depth to groundwater and remove all of the lower lying inundated areas so that the arterial drains were only dry, it would cost $12 million just for that one catchment. So if you were looking at savings on fill and lowering the groundwater levels, there's definite benefits in terms of fill cost. Yep. Another economic saving could be looking at water supply. Water Corporation have done some initial planning for the area, and they have two solutions. They've got an interim supply solution, and they also have a long-term solution for the development. So the interim solution is a water supply tank from Mandurah, taking a supply line off the Mandurah tank. And then if demand exceeds a certain limit for the initial development areas, that's the hashed areas, a second interim supply tank would be required on one of the lots. So that particular supplementary supply would cost $5.5 million. If alternative supplies were provided for that initial area, then maybe that $5.5 million wouldn't be required to supplement demand. So that's the initial solution. If we now look at long-term supplies, ultimately, a $45 million tank and system is going to have to be installed in the northern area of the development. And that is to supply for the industrial development that goes beyond these hashed initial areas. So we're looking at about maybe in 20 years' time, or as soon as these lots are sold and the development front is expanding towards the north. So if Water Corporation were to delay building such a system, they could delay the cost of $45 million, or they could revise the costs down if they have a MAR system supplying a non-potable system.
Okay, Wendy?
Yeah, I think that's it. So in summary, the MAR can be used to achieve the three key principles from the DWMP. MAR can create long-term cost offsets as well as short-term cost offsets. MAR can provide certainty to the industrial estate proponents that it will meet water quality requirements, and it can also provide a smart, clean and green marketing image for the new industrial area.